I remember the first time I ever heard an Earl Sweatshirt song. It was definitely Chum. I was like 14 years old, and I wasn't even really listening to whatever he was talking about. Not gonna lie, I just liked the beat. Dum 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 dum. Shit was hard. First time I listened to Doris fully, I was like, I think like 15 years old or something, and I was going through that phase where my music taste was like heavily expanding. So I was actually listening to lyrics and shit now. Doris was hard as fuck. Like, when it comes to pure rapping, I still feel like that's Earl's best album. Hive is one of my favorite rap songs ever, and it's just one of the numerous times Earl spazzed on this album. On Sasquatch, he was bugging. On Whoa, he was bugging. Night, he was bugging. Aside from the rapping, though, I love this album because it was kind of relatable as somebody who was approaching my late teens and starting to struggle with more real-world issues the more time passed. Earl talked about his strained relationship with his mama a couple times on this album, the absence of his father, and how the loss of close family members impacted his mental state. I'm obviously not a famous rapper, so I can't directly connect with Earl mentioning how he was struggling with the death of his grandma, but felt like he had to get over it to make music so he could please his fans. However, it's a good example of how sometimes life doesn't allow you to properly grieve or handle personal issues that can contribute to your mental state deteriorating. Writing-wise, compared to some of his later projects, it can seem kinda juvenile at times, but I think that's kinda what makes it even more real to me. He was a kid that was going through shit, and he wasn't even at his lowest point yet. Throughout the album, you just get the raw feelings of a teenager that's going through stuff and expressing it. And his later work that's more mature is still excellent writing-wise, but Doris will always have a different kind of feeling for me. Now, when I first heard I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, that's when I was like, alright, this guy's fucking miserable. It was during quarantine, and I was at my lowest point around then, maybe like 17 years old or so. That album made me cry a couple times because I was a fucking mess. Fawcett in particular, there's so much he said in that song that hit close to home. Around that time, I was actually having serious issues with my mom, and we barely spoke, even though we were both shut up in the house together because of quarantine. On Fawcett, Earl talks about how he wishes he could go back to before his mother basically saw him as a stranger. He says he can't really put a smile on her face anymore, even through money. The relationship was beyond strained. It was broken at that point. Earl talks about regretting him and his mom's past beef a lot throughout his albums, and it's kind of a reminder to never let your current emotions or anger allow you to say certain things or do certain things you're going to regret later on down the line, because from Doris all the way to some rap songs, Earl is constantly talking about how much him and his mother's broken relationship hurts him. Fawcett was a song about loneliness as well. He mentions how he's distancing himself from his friends, he kind of feels lost, and he started to sacrifice personal relationships for the sake of money. The topic of isolating from friends is a recurrent theme on this album, but Earl does give multiple different reasons for why. He mentions that he doesn't know who he can trust on grief. He also mentions that he feels like certain people are only around him when he's doing good, so he's only happy when times are turbulent. It's not hard to see why this was Earl's lowest point. Pushing people away from him while simultaneously yearning for support, but also feeling like you can't trust anybody that could potentially support you, it's the worst mix of emotions. His alcoholism that stemmed from his grandmother's death didn't help either. Rapping-wise, the album is still tough, by the way. It's not like he's just rambling about how much his life sucks. Off Top is one of his hardest songs to me. I love the production on that one.
Tryna pay my mama rent, figure that's just what I owe her. I've been troubled since I tumbled out that stroller strolling.
I love Huey's beat too.
I spent the day drinking and missing my grandmother. Just grab a glass and pour some cold white wine in.
Wool was obviously a banger. Him and Vince never failed to make a tough-ass track together.
Now my fist full of spliffs and the old banker receipts. Bitches grip the stick and jerky like cold shanks to the beef.
It's definitely way easier to listen to than SRS, but it's still an overwhelmingly sad album. I remember sitting on my bed after finishing it like, shit, I hope he went to therapy after dropping that. Whole time this nigga dropped Solace a month later. 10 straight minutes of bare misery is genuinely one of the most concerningly depressing songs I've ever heard in my life. Within the first 8 bars, he mentions his severe depression, the fact that he's anemic and not eating, often smokes instead of consuming food. He feels like he's gonna quote-unquote go out like River Phoenix, an actor that died at 23 from heart failure due to drugs. And then he says if he does, mail the ashes to his mom. Yeah, that's quite the introduction. Part 2's verse is probably the most concerning part of the song. Earl says he's about to give up, implying suicidal thoughts. But the worst part about it is Earl repeating that if it's like this the whole time, he'll be alright, because he's been here before. He's grown, not really comfortable in his depression, but he's so used to it that he's just accepted it and willing to live out the rest of his days like that until his inevitable young death that he mentioned in the first part. Sheesh. That's grim. The last part Earl raps on is part 4, where he brings up his grandmother and how he misses her and feels like he could use her guidance. He ends off the song saying,
I'm the youngest old man that you know. If your soul intact, let me know.
I wasn't an Earl fan around this time. It dropped in 2015. I was 11, bruh. I didn't give a fuck about nothing but hooping and ducking cooties at school. I really hope the people in his life gathered around him when they heard this shit, though. Because if a friend of mine ever got in the stool and basically cried for help in the booth for 10 minutes straight, there's no chance I'd ever leave them alone until it was 100% sure they wouldn't harm themselves. This was a very concerning song, but it also was a very raw and real song. And it's not a lot of artists that would ever put something out like that. Some rap songs came out in 2018, and this album definitely needed to grow on me because the first time I listened to it, shortly after I listened to Solace, I was like, what the fuck is this? It's still not the easiest album to listen to, but writing-wise, you can easily argue it's Earl's best album. My favorite thing about this project isn't the freaky samples or anything, it's just the fact that Earl seems to finally be starting to do better. You look at some of the stuff he's saying, and it sounds like his mental state has vastly improved from I don't like shit, I don't go outside. On the Mint, he says,
lot of blood to let, peace to make, give a fuck about a check.
Basically saying he wants to start bloodletting, which is an old practice where I think they cut open a person and let the blood flow to get rid of diseases and shit. Earl's basically saying he wants to clean up his mental and find peace. He's not really mainly worried about the money no more. Remember, on Fawcett, he said he didn't have time for his personal issues and relationships because he was mainly worried about getting money. I also love how he speaks about most of his darker thoughts in a past tense kind of way. He's not exactly having those thoughts anymore. On Nowhere to Go, he says,
I spent most of my life depressed. Only thing on my mind was that. Didn't know my time was next.
It gives off the vibe that he's reflecting instead of commenting on his current predicament. My favorite bars, though, were the ones where he says,
Why ain't nobody tell me I was sinking? Ain't nobody tell me I could leave.
Because yes, you literally can climb out of depression. It is possible. It's something that I didn't realize for years. I dealt with severe depression from the age 15, and even now, I don't know if I've fully climbed out of it, but the idea that it's possible is what gives you the boost to get out of there. On Solace, Earl seemed complacent, perfectly fine with living in misery until his quickly approaching death. Here, he has an undertone of hope, and that shit damn made me smile while listening to the album. On Shattered Dreams, he talks about leaving alcoholic friends behind, and he asks why nobody told him he was sinking. Having people around you who are willing to drag you out of depression is one of the most essential parts of getting better, and as he repeatedly said on I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, Earl didn't have a lot of people he could trust around him, and it didn't help his situation. It is important to note that this album wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, and though there were signs of Earl's mental improvement, there was still a lot of dark clouds hanging overhead. Earl's father died almost a year before he dropped the album, and Earl talked about how he felt out of place at the funeral on Peanuts, partially because I don't think he knew a lot of people on his dad's side in South Africa, and partially because he barely knew his dad himself at all. I look at some rap songs as an album basically saying, I'm not okay, I know I'm not okay, and I know why I'm not okay, but I now understand that it's possible to be okay. Even through the numerous miserable lines on this album, there's an undertone of freedom and reflection, as if he was chained up by his misery before and he had no way of getting out, but now he has the key in his hand and all he has to do is figure out how to reach the padlock. There's so many great lines that I personally love on this album, a few of them pertaining to Earl and his mom.
Mama say don't play with them scabs. It's safe to say I see the reason I'm bleeding out.
Yeah, another line about how Earl regrets not listening to his mother when he was younger.
It's not a black woman I can't thank.
Is another line I love because even though Earl and his mother had a strained and damn near broken relationship, he still fully appreciates her for taking care of him alone and trying her best.
Say goodbye to my openness, total eclipse of my shine that I grown to miss from holding shit in.
A line about how Earl swallowing his issues and refusing to talk about his emotions and feelings caused him to lose his quote-unquote shine. It made his depression worse, and he's basically saying he missed the way he used to be, but there wasn't much he could do about it. Earl's writing talent was on full display this album, and he put some real heavy bars in here that stuck with me. You'd think the often deadpan delivery would make it hard for a lot of songs to be memorable, but so much from this album sticks with you. The most popular track from this thing is literally an instrumental, come on. I'm not sure how Earl is doing right now. It's been 6 years since some rap songs. He dropped a couple albums since then. I think one of them is with The Alchemist. I remember seeing something about it. I don't remember much from Sick. I wasn't the hugest fan of that album. I'll give it a re-listen at some point when I get the chance. Maybe it'll grow on me like some rap songs. Earl's first 3 albums were definitely the ones that stuck out to me the most though. I saw some recent videos of him on the internet and he seems to be living life, and I'm glad. If you're going through something and you feel like you're stuck there, please just remember that it's not permanent at all and there's always a way out.